Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm just going to give it another minute or so for everyone to log in. So sit tight and we will start the webinar in about a minute's time. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Just going to give it another 10 or 20 seconds. We're still getting a few people logging in, and then we will start the webinar. Okay, let's get started. Thank you everyone for joining us today. This is the second of our effective spelling Spellinars that are being presented by Christine Topfer, the lead author of our effective spelling series. So this second Spellinar is on the big idea morphological word families. So I do want to thank Christine for joining us today and taking the time to present. Just some general housekeeping before we get started today. Just so you know, everyone is on mute. That's a setting that we've put on the webinar today. There is a lot of you and having it on mute makes it a lot easier to present. If you do have any issues, please put them in the chat window and I will be monitoring that throughout Christine's presentation so I can help you out there if needed. So the chat window, if you're looking for it, if you hover across the bottom of your screen, you should see a number of function buttons pop up and the chat is there. We are recording today's session, so everyone will get a copy of that recording next week. Keep an eye out in your inbox and that will come from the Nelson Primary email that you would have got the invitation to this session from. Okay. Now, just see, we've still got a few people logging in, but that's okay. You should all be seeing Christine's slide deck currently, and you may also have little video windows that are up on usually the right-hand side. If you want to hide them, you can. if you go for the single line, you can hide all the thumbnail videos so that you get the full screen on the PowerPoint slides. Now this session should go for about 45-50 minutes. We'll see how we go, but we do aim to have you logging out by 5 p.m. to start your evenings after what I am sure was a very busy day for you. So thank you, and without further ado, I will pass you over to Christine.
Thanks very much, Mel, and welcome everyone, and thank you for taking the time this afternoon to join us on learning more about the effective spelling teaching guides, and in particular today, the big idea around morphological word families. First of all, though, as we talk about morphological word families, we really need to start to think about what you understand about the English language. So one of the important points to remember about English is that it's a morphophonemic language. That is, that English spelling system represents both the sound and the meaning. And you can see on the screen here a quote from Chomsky and Hale way back in 1968 saying that the English language preserves in print what is otherwise obscured in pronunciation. And here's one example of the words compete and competition. So in compete, we hear a long E sound, and in competition, we almost have that schwa. So, but the meaning connection is there because the C-O-M-P-E-T-E is there in the word competition. The base is there. This is the whole idea around teaching students around morphological word families. Let me give you another example. So if we understand morphology, then it helps our students to reduce the grapheme choice of words when they're going to write, because words with common morphemes maintain consistent spelling even when the pronunciation varies. This is very helpful and a really important idea for our students. If you have a look here, you can see, and you'll have seen all these things before, I'm sure, but the base sign or the word sign here, we do not pronounce the G, but in signature we do. But both these words come from the same base element. The same with the word real, and then we look at another word in that family of reality. So here, these are all signs that the actual spelling stays the same. So the grapheme choice we have is the same, but actually the sound varies. So look at the word soft, and you can hear the T or the T sound on the end of soft. But then if you say soften, you don't actually articulate that, the T, but the letters are still there. The same with define, where the base is F-I-N-E, and then you say definition, still has the same base. So we have the same grapheme choice because these words have common morphemes. And this is a very important idea and very helpful for spelling. Another idea around morphology that's very helpful, and it's an organising principle, is that spelling marks connections in meaning. So in English, words notoriously do not always reflect their sounds, as you've just seen in the previous slide. They often reflect their morphological structure instead. And so this whole idea that words and spelling is connected to meaning is a crucial part of spelling, and quite often a missing link in many classrooms. So here's another example where we can see with please that the P-L-E-A-S-E is the base of each of these words. But when we say please, we hear an E sound. So, but when we say pleasant, we then articulate an Et sound. But in actual fact, these words are connected through their meaning, through their base elements. So this is what we're going to look at in a morphological word family. You can see this flexible vowel digraph, EA, that can actually represent the long E sound in these words and the short Et sound. And this is an absolutely rich part of English where we have these vowel digraphs, especially that can represent different phonemes. And here, even in this one word family, we see that the letter S can represent two different sounds. I'm sorry, that's just jumped out of its little slashes there. And the same here with clean, cleanse and cleanliness. So this organising principle of English marking connections to meaning, or the spelling marking connections to meaning, is crucial to students' success in spelling. You'll see this in the Australian curriculum. It reminds us that we must explicitly teach that all words are built from meaningful parts, or morphemes that we should be calling them. That is, all words are either a base, or they have a base and may have various affixes. Starting in foundation, and you can see here on the screen, I've just put a yellow part around the Australian curriculum where you can actually see that it mentions in the spelling area of the Australian curriculum that we need to be working in morphology. And in foundation, it reminds us that students need to understand that words can be made of more than one meaningful part. And so this is where the work in morphological word families will really build some of this understanding. So I wanted to show you that what we have in our big ideas spread right across the year levels is actually what is reflected in the Australian curriculum. These are the big ideas across all of the 4 teaching guides. And I just wanted to show you how we have a reference to morphological word families in each area, in each one of these teaching guides. And this is something that people often say, oh, which year level? Well, it's in all year levels. These big ideas are so important that we study them right across the years. But we know that learning is cumulative and not linear. And so we're going to be building this understanding throughout. We always learn more by revisiting the concepts previously experienced, and with conversation and reflection, we develop deeper understanding. So the same is true when we're learning about words. So students will continually deepen their knowledge of English orthography by experiencing ongoing investigations of these morphological word families as a regular part of your spelling program. And to support you with these inquiries, we've provided you with sample learning sequences in each of those teaching guides. So I'm not going to talk more about those now. So another idea for you to think about, and of course this all relates to, you will have seen in our books and in the Guiding Thinking for Effective Spelling book around the spelling strategies. So this is all related to the meaning strategy of spelling, and some of the guiding principles linked to meaning are that spelling is about connections of meaning. So you've just seen that example. So when words have a linked meaning, the words tend to show that link. And we saw that, say, in the words sign and signal and resign and resignation and design. As words or parts of words that mean the same can be spelled even if they sound different. The next point here is that it's also about differences of meaning. So spelling can show differences of meaning even when words sound the same. So that's, when we look at homophones, so here and meet and meet. And another principle is that word families have ties of meaning and structure. So a family of words is related by structure and meaning. That means they share spelling, and you saw that, say, in please and pleasant, or all of the ones that we've just looked at. And this is the area of these word families with ties of meaning and structure that we're going to look at today. So you might say, well, what is a morphological word family? Well, each word has a common base, or a base element as we call them, that shares a common spelling and a meaning. So here, what do you notice about these words? Have a look at one of these words. You might want to look at them like this in what we call a word web. So we never consider words in isolation when we're working with spelling. And this is what's very generative about a morphological word family work, is that a word is always related, or most words are related to other words that they belong to in these meaning families or morphological word families. So words which share common origins have meanings in common too, and they're likely to share similarities in their spelling. So this is a concept that all students need to understand, is every English word has a base element which holds the meaning and the link to the spelling. Because you'll notice here that we have pack in every one of these. It's always spelt P-A-C-K. Sometimes it's in a compound word and sometimes has a prefix or a suffix. So let's have a look more closely at this. to be in the same morphological word family. And you'll notice in the Australian curriculum, I feel it still might say morphemic word family. It's meaning the same thing, morphological word family. That to be in this morphological word family, that they need to share a common base element, as you can see there, and they have to have the same root or origin, that is the history or etymology, which shares an underlying meaning. And you'll notice that we talked before about this sign and signal and design, but if you were to look them up in a dictionary or in this wonderful free resource online etymology dictionary, you'll find that those words have a Latin root and they come from signum, meaning identifying mark. They share the same denotation, the same meaning. And so maybe could these words be connected by structure and meaning? Something you might ask the students, and you can have a look and say and think, well, what is the base? Could it actually be able to find what the base might be? So maybe if it was QUEST, then you would find that you could look up and think about what does that actually mean and how does that meaning weave its way through all of these words. Remember, sometimes it will be a direct meaning and sometimes it will, over time, be more a connotation, morphological, metaphorical, where the meaning just weaves through the word, the original meaning. So word families have ties of meaning and structure, and this is the crucial part of what we talk about in our morphological word families. Here are a couple of examples that you can see. They are formed from what we call free base elements. So you'll notice in the books we talk about free bases and bound bases rather than a base word. They are, in effect, a word, but it's actually easier for students to understand that all words have a base or are a base or have a base, and we use that same language and sometimes the base is not free, and I'll show you that in a moment. So we have this family for the create, or the CREATE is the actual base of all of these words, and the same here with plant, or PLANT is the base of all of these words, and they all share a similar meaning to something about to put here for plant, to put in the ground or to grow, and over here to make, grow, to create. So in fact, interesting connection that you could explore. We provide in our word noticing books also a place for students to keep the morphological word families that they investigate and study so that they can be used and revisited and for proofreading and writing, for inquiry work, and obviously building vocabulary. So spelling takes no notice of some sounds, and this is why morphological word families are so powerful for you to include into your programs. That if you have a look at this family of the CREATE family, and when we look at the words that can be created from this particular family, have a look at how the letters are represented. So it doesn't matter that the EA represents two different phonemes, or that the T in create represents a different phoneme in creation and creature. The spelling system allows the sequences of letters EA to be read as a single sound or as two successive sounds, but we always write them CREATE. So this is very powerful for our students. Word families can also be made, obviously, from bound bases. So a bound base is what you may call a Latin or Greek root, or I'm not sure what language you use, but the correct terminology really is a bound base, meaning that it's actually needs an affix, a prefix or a suffix or another base in order for it to construct a word that makes meaning. And so they'll often come from a Latin or Greek origin, but we're referring to these now as bound bases. And so here's the PEND base, meaning to hang. It's a denotation of to hang. And you can see in all of these words around that belong in this family, there's actually a connection to something around hanging, even though these words are used in lots of different places in our language. You can also notice by looking at morphological word families, things like here in the word haphazard. So if the base is HAP, it's the base of the word happy and happily. But once you understand the structure of words, you can see, or students can start to notice that the PH in this word is not writing the phoneme, that it's actually a P and an H because they sit in separate morphemes in the word. And the same here for in mishap, that the SH is not writing a sh sound here because it's actually in two different morphemes. So this is useful knowledge for students and things you'll explore as you move into morphological word families. So in the resources, we've provided you with further information, and in that section, building teacher knowledge. It's in every one of the big ideas and in the morphological word families right across the 4 teaching guides. There'll be different information, so we just build on that understanding. So I suggest that you read those to build your understanding around morphological word families. And it starts in our foundation where we've called it, rather than morphological word families, we've just called that big idea, words are made of meaningful parts. So students and teachers need to understand that words are made of meaningful parts. And you can see on the right-hand side of the screen here, just various combinations. Of course, there's many, many others, but this is that each of these words would have a base, and here's another little family that would fit there on the joy family. And you can see that there's a base, common base going through all of these words, always spelt J-O-Y. So in the teaching guides, what Emma and Bethany and myself have done is to look at the Australian curriculum and think about what would be the big ideas that you need to teach in any particular year levels. And so how would they lend themselves to working in morphological word families? Because as I said before, all words belong to a family, or there are a few outliers that don't have any other relatives. But when you're looking in the learning areas, that the language and the words students are going to be using, they're the ones that you want to be studying and exploring, because they're going to need to be able to write those when they're demonstrating their understanding in some way. And so we've got here just a few examples that these are straight out of the books, but say in mathematics here in foundation, you could explore the family of day. And in 1-2, we've given examples of maybe you could explore the word time and all of its all of its relatives. In science in Year 2, there's all about mixtures in science. So mix might be a great word to look at and its relatives. And then here's just examples, because we have them all obviously in the books, of the Year 5. Here in science, you might be, when you're looking in Earth as part of a system of planets, you might look at star or aster or ORB or SUN or SOL. All of these are bases of words that are going to be quite generative in the learning area and really worth exploring. So we offer you those under the headings of linking the big ideas to other curriculum areas. And of course, you would have plenty of your own as well. So when we're planning for investigative word study, you'll see in the first chapter of all of the teaching guides that we write about, there's a couple of pages there around a sequence of learning. And we talk about day 1 to day 8. Well, that's also about how long is a piece of string, because it depends on what big idea you're exploring and whether you're having 10 minutes or half an hour. Sometimes you'll dip in very short amounts every day, and other times you'll just go off on this amazing exploration. So we don't like to put an exact time, but we do want you to know that we should be looking at words every day, right across the day in all learning areas. And morphological word families is a fantastic place to look at words and how they're constructed and how they make their meaning in every learning area, and therefore right across the day. But once you know how to explore morphological word families, you'll also be able to integrate them into any learning, because you'll be finding connections all the time. But remember that every time that you build a word, So even if you're teaching prep or reception or foundation or whichever state you're from, and you're looking at onset and rhyme, the children have created a word which is potentially a base upon which other words can be built. So you'll see that morphological word families links very closely with all the other big ideas. So you don't necessarily have to be just doing morphological word families. You can actually put morphological word families into any other spelling feature that you might be exploring. So let's take a moment to have a look into Emma's classroom. So Emma and Bethany are my co-writers. The three of us have put together these teaching guides, and currently Emma is teaching in a year 1. And so these photos that I'm going to share with you I've taken straight from her classroom just in the last couple of weeks. And the learning sequence focused on the word house. And this was a feature in their investigation sessions in her classroom, so play-based environment. They had a house, as you can see there. This is an image from her classroom. She has created this in her classroom. So the tuning in related to the house that was created in their play space in the classroom. And but they also enjoyed this wonderful new publication over here, Goodbye House, Hello House by Margaret Wilde and Anne James. So you'll always see that we start any big idea with tuning in. So in morphological families, the tuning in can be from your learning area, or it could be from a piece of literature, the most important word in that piece of literature, the key idea from that piece of literature might be a word that you now dig deeper into and look at a morphological word family. Or as Emma has done, it was from her play-based investigations. Words we're using all the time, so you can never, there's no end to where you can start your tuning in. So in her classroom, the students were asked to work together in pairs to explore the meaning of house, of the word house, and to think about other words that might be related to the word house. So she's just tuning them in here and remembering that it's all about meaning. So much discussion was held around the word home, and you can see a few children there in their writing have written home. So that came up, and they're wondering if that was connected to the word house, and could that be possible to be in the morphological word family? But the children also know that morphological word families actually have to have the same spelling, H-O-U-S-E. So that's the meaning, that's the structure and the meaning as well. And H-O-M-E doesn't have that same structure. So the children learned that the word house is come from Old English. It was a very old word, and it means dwelling or shelter or building designed to be used as a residence, as a place to live. And they discovered that the main difference between the words house and home was that house was like concrete. It was the building where someone lives, and that home, in contrast, could refer to either a building or to any location that a person thinks of as the place where they would live, and that belongs to them. So a home can be a tent, it can be an apartment, it could be a boat, or it could be a house, it could be a cave. So there was a lot of exploration around meaning as they were tuning in before they moved on to actually exploring the morphological word family. So now they moved into explicitly noticing the pattern. So you'll notice that in our learning sequences, we start with the same always, that inquiry process of tuning in, explicitly noticing the pattern, guided practice, independent practice, reflection, and you'll see that through all the big ideas. So what they have done is they started to think about which words would belong to the house family. So they had to think about, what does the word mean? What is the word structure? And how is the word built? And so they sat round on the floor and started to have these conversations. They were reminded that to belong to the house family, there needed to be that meaning connection to house, and also that structure connection of H-O-U-S-E needed to be in each of the words. And so together they played a game of which word belongs to the family, and they put the words that Emma had created from the day before all of the brainstorming around words. She'd written them onto cards and also had thought of some others to have a discussion around, would it belong to the family or wouldn't? And they discovered that words like shack and home went on the outside of the circle, because while they might have a meaning connection, there's no structure. H-O-U-S-E is not in those words. They cannot belong to the family. Here's a child here who's discussing that glass house belongs to the family because it has H-O-U-S-E in it, but also he would know that it is a house that's made out of glass, and so therefore there was a meaning connection, so it did belong to that family. Then they moved on to some guided practice, and in the books you'll find that in our sample units we have guided practice, but also at the end of the sample there's a whole lot of other activities that you could use as things that you might do. Some of the very common ones are things like building a word web, or making writing them into sums. So what they did on the following day, they in their guided practice, Emma made explicit the graphemes that represent the phonemes in house. So this is a nice connection. So they need to know this as well, that they noted that the OU was representing the ow sound in house. They also noted that this E on the end is not representing a sound at all, and that it was made explicit that this E is actually what we call a plural cancelling E. It stopped the word house looking like a plural. So when it was created many hundreds of years ago, that E was put there. So there was a discussion around the connection to history. And then children worked in pairs to create a word web of the words that belong to the morphological family, and they were asked to write a few words as word sums to show the meaningful parts. They also, in their guided practice, noticed that many of the words in the house family were compound words. And so some students explored the word lighthouse, sharing stories of lighthouses and they may have visited, and they read the Lighthouse Keeper's Lunch to make that connection to the learning. They just started a word noticing board. You'll find in the chapter 1 of all of the teaching guides that we talk about word noticing boards, and we reference them continually throughout every sample learning sequence. So for Emma, the word noticing board is here. You can see the image from her Year 1 class, and they also at the bottom of they said what a morphological word family was at the top, so words that are connected by meaning and structure. They also wrote some word sums from the words that they'd created. This helped the children see that H-O-U-S-E was in each of those words on their word noticing board. They created an anchor chart, and you'll read about anchor charts also in the first chapter, where they'd written about what their word study question was what do we know about the base house, or H-O-U-S-E, and what words are in this family. And then they wondered about home and did it belong, and then there's a whole lot of things that so this is inking the students' thinking, and they had written various things, especially wondering around whether they noticed that there were a lot of compound words. They noticed that sometimes house was at the beginning of the compound and sometimes it was the end. So there was a doll house and then there was a housekeeper. So that was an interesting noticing as well. They went on and did some quick writes, so for independent practice. Emma challenged them to choose some words from the house family and see if they could use those in a meaningful piece of writing. And this particular child has already, after they'd finished their writing, was going back to identify those words. So they're now using the words in the morphological family in a meaningful context. And we always, in all of the learning sequences, suggest you're making reading, writing connections. So always pushing to writing and to reading, so that we don't just learn about spelling in isolation, because we need to be able to use what we learn. So this child had already used house, housekeeper, farmhouse, doll's house in their writing. So then there were other students who really wanted to explore further morphological word families at this particular time. So this can be in your differentiation or extension. We provide ideas that we put in next steps, but this particular child had chosen to explore words that would belong to the wood family. So they were off exploring, finding out the meaning and collecting words that would belong to the wood family. And you can collect words from any family as you do this, and children will start to learn about, because this is your connection to the big idea explorations of prefixes and suffixes as well, because children are going to notice all of these different prefixes and suffixes that are actually added to their bases, and so you can have those displayed in your classroom as well. So the children then recorded their learning in their word noticing book. So you'll notice that each of the each of the teaching guides has a word noticing book that accompanies it. And so in Emma's classroom, they chose this particular page from the 1-2 word noticing book, where they recorded house. So they put house as the base, and this child has actually got the house family, they've got the wood family, they have the sun family, and the day family are ones that they'd already explored. So this becomes a wonderful resource for them as they to take forward. So that's not a workbook, it's a place where they keep the words that they've investigated, and now they can use that as a resource for other investigations and to use to support them in their writing in all learning areas. So we also have in our sample learning sequence pre and post assessment ideas. So for Emma, she just started by asking them to think about what words might be related, but she could equally ask the children post the assessment to create their own, as an example here, their own word web. So we've been talking about the base House. For this particular one, it's actually a word, it's house. What other words have you learned that are related by meaning and structure? And children can write these as a bit of an assessment task to check for understanding, as we call it in the books. You could give the students a word and ask them to analyse it according to its structure that belong to that particular, like maybe lighthouses, and see what they could tell you about its structure. Or you could ask them to build a matrix, which is this example over here where they, so they could either make a matrix, or you can give them a matrix and see how many words they can create, where you put the base in the centre. And then we write about this in the books as well. The prefixes in the left and the suffixes in the right. If it's a base, and we always put bold, if these ones here that are in bold, that's because they're bases as well. That's how many compound words can be created in the house family. So they're usually bolded, and they will belong to their own family as well, which you could explore at another time. So the pre and post assessment ideas are there for you to think about. So documenting the learning happens in many ways. It happens on the word noticing board, which is really important, the anchor charts that are very important to the learning, and then students in their word noticing books where that they keep a personal record, and I would suggest that you have a class word noticing book as well, so you can always be going back to refer to what you've learned about morphological word families, because there are many infinite number of word families that you could explore. This is why it doesn't belong to any particular year level, it belongs to everyone, because this is the basic structure of a word. So here are some examples. This is the one of the examples that we give as a sample learning sequence in Foundation. And I'll just quickly show you the ones right through the teaching guides. Just a word to remind us from the research. So Misty Adenu tells us that if we delay our work with morphemes until students prove themselves with sounds, that means that they're going to miss out on years of valuable instruction. And this is why we must start from the beginning. Therefore, in Foundation, students should learn that words can have more than one morpheme, and that recognising these structures in words will help them to spell other words. And so the example we give is around plurals, actually. So it's not strictly a morphological word family. It is about, but we do suggest ideas that you can use there. It's about having children at the beginning understanding that words are made of meaningful parts, and plurals is a great place to start. Obviously, we start with literature. As you can see some examples, we give you lots of ideas, but you could have many of your own to get you started. And then this is actually an example of an anchor chart that we would create, because after all, when we say dogs, we hear a z, but we know because it's plural, we always add an s. So that's sort of the big idea that we explore in Foundation, but we do give you many others. But just so that you can see the connection between the big ideas. I've just put an example here from the onset and rhyme big idea in foundation. So you might be exploring, say you're exploring the onset and rhyme of UN. So you've got sun, fun, bun, run. Now, every one of these words in this onset and rhyme is a base, and it's a base that you could use to generate other words and learn more about morphological word families. So while you're exploring maybe onset and rhyme as a useful spelling patterns here, you could at the same time say pull sun out, because you're talking about weather and it's part of your science curriculum, and explore the morphological family of sun. So these big ideas don't live in isolation, they are connected, and so this is something just to show you a connection that you might make perhaps in foundation. So in the year 1-2, we've made connections to other curriculum areas for you to tune in again, and the example that we've used here is the word one, and these are just some of the literature that we have pulled out for you to, because it's all about number as well, isn't it, of understanding words in their context of use is actually a very important part and makes the learning far more memorable because it's meaning based. So this example is from the sample learning sequence, and it is about one, and just some examples of some of the things that we've done in classrooms where children have explored the meaning of one and other words that are connected to that meaning. And it's interesting that the word only is the only member of this family that's retained its original pronunciation, but it could be also a helpful mnemonic for children to remember the O in one, which they don't actually hear, but they do see this visual connection and meaning connection in all of these words. Also, then we have the word over here, alone and lone. So this is a one is also connected to the word alone, but in actual fact, lone has become its own base. So this was all alone, so that is actually part of the morphological family, but lone has become its own base now, and we have lone and lonely, and you'll see that in the book. But these are the sorts of things that will really help children understand the meaning of words and also the structure. So in the 1-2, another suggestion, if you're learning about in a big idea around long vowels, so that's one of the big ideas, and this is just a chart, one of the sound charts that you would see in the big idea and that you would have in your classroom. It's in the word noticing book as well, but you could pull a word from each of these different ways of representing the long, and so the graphemes that represent that long A phoneme, you could choose one of each of these various words to build a morphological word family. So here's an example where you might have been studying this particular phoneme and all of the different graphemes that we use to represent it. Oops, sorry. And then pick out rain and explore that as a morphological word family. And we offer that as a suggestion under science in the 1-2 book as well. So in the 3-4, what we have done is explore a connection to the curriculum and used history as our connection, as our sample learning sequence. And the words that we've explored here were explore and discover, or discovery, because they are words that you're going to be using in history or HAS during 3-4. So why would we not explore those and use them to extend their understanding of words and how they work. So the tuning in was this particular text, but it could equally be any tuning in from your inquiry unit. We explicitly notice the pattern, look at how the word explore is constructed. Maybe in guided practice would build a word web. You don't have to over-analyse. If you only analyse it down to this being the base at the beginning, you're going to find that's fine and very generative, but you will be interested later to find out that maybe EX could be a prefix, and you can investigate that. This is about investigating possibilities and then proving. So when you're looking at a morphological word family, you have a hypothesis that this may be a base, the PLORE. So then you think, well, are there other words where EX acts as a prefix, and you think about it, and children will come up with examples. If you can find 2 other examples, then we go, now we've got a possibility that this could be working as a prefix. And so it's actually the hypothesis and then the exploration that is so valuable in the learning around morphological word families. And so you may, in guided practice, they may make a word web again, have discovered with the word discover that they have realised that DIS is acting as a prefix. They might have to think about what other words do they know where DIS acts as a prefix, because they could go, oh, well, actually, I think the base is over, O-V-E-R, sorry. And then so your structure test here is, well, if we cut this off at the C, do we know any other words where C holds some meaning is like acting as a prefix? And I'll go, oh, I don't think so. So it doesn't pass the structure test. So we know, no, this must actually be the base. Now, this is a reason when we look at morphological word families, it's really important for you to realise why we don't ask kids to just look for little words in big words. We have to help them to notice the meaningful parts of words, because that's and so sometimes they might be a smaller word inside the big word, but it's not just like trying to find over in the word cover. That is not helpful for spelling. So when we have guided practice and we have independent practice, and so this particular one, I wrote an example of, why don't we ask the kids to write a blurb for this particular book, but they have to use a word from the Explore family and the Discover family in their blurb. So I'm trying to give you ideas of purposeful ways of taking these words to writing. Here, check for understanding. This is just an example from a classroom. Someone sent me here of what do you know about the word, and then the children were actually what they knew about their word, what did it mean, and what are other words that belong to that family. So just checking in any way to help see that children are growing their understanding. Remembering that learning is not linear, it is cumulative, and the more times we dip back into this, the over the course of your years of schooling, the better they'll understand it. So Chomsky, and where we started right at the beginning, she says that as soon as the children's vocabulary permits, they could take up words like major to majority, history to historical. Notice the change in sound. Nature, natural. To see how one and the same root or base or stem changes its pronunciation as different endings are added to it. They might even profitably be introduced to the idea that the root, or we call it base or stem, alone doesn't really have a specific pronunciation until you know what ending goes with it. So you can see here that another example, explore, we just talked about that in the previous example, to exploratory. Once again, the stress in the word is different, so we articulate it differently, and that is why we actually announce so you've been hearing me say, PLORE is actually the base element, because I don't know exactly how it's going to be articulated until it's in a particular word. And so spelling is about announcing the letters, and then we articulate the word when we know which word it's actually going to be in. So this is way back in 1970 that we have been learning about this. So in the resources, in the morphological word families, we've also given you, so this is in the particularly in the 3, 4 and the 5, 6 teaching guide, we've done some work for you where we've done some exploration of some bases and some particularly bound bases here to give you an idea of where you can go. Clearly, the important thing is that you do this investigation with the kids and you come up with some hypotheses of could this word belong, and then let's have a look at perhaps in a dictionary to check and to look at its actual origin to see if they do come from the same origin. So it's an investigation in that way. But we did give you some in these morphological sort of word family lists to get you enticed into starting this work. Because remember, all words have a base. Here's an interesting one. We need to teach these in context. So C-O-N means together, and T-E-X-T is to weave or to make. So we weave or make together means we teach it in context. So every time you look at a morphological word family, you're teaching vocabulary as well. And in fact, we don't need vocabulary because they really are morphological word families. So in the 5-6 book, we encourage you very much to be looking at the curriculum, and we've done some looking for you to get you started. So have a look at our ideas and see where to go to from there. So topics such as federation and immigration, filtration, irreversible are all parts of your curriculum and words that children will need to understand and be able to use in writing. So these investigations should be a core part of your spelling work. Explore words and their relatives, or when you explore words and their relatives, it will broaden the students' vocabulary as well as their spelling knowledge. So word learning is no longer in lists of unrelated words. It is far more generative, where students learn the features of one word, and in so doing, they'll learn to spell a multitude of related words. And that's the essence of morphological word families. And you can see some more here, like NAT being the base. Did you know it was the base of natural and nation? What a wonderful opportunity to explore the meanings of these words and how they are connected in structure and meaning. So this example here is never consider words united to remind you. So it's there is taken from the book. So this is a matrix, and we've given you just a form here that the students can actually use in their word noticing books to record the words that they've been exploring in a word matrix. And so here's a matrix, and then here are all the words that could be constructed from this matrix. Remember that no matrix is ever complete. There could be more words that you will find and that you will need to add, but these are all meaningful parts of words that students can learn and explore. And you'll notice the lines here because this suffix goes with this suffix, so we put a line so that you can see these separate suffixes that work together, because sometimes students think that a suffix is something that goes after a base, but it actually does go after a base, but not necessarily exactly there, because there can be more than one prefix or suffix. So the words which share common origins have meanings in common too, and are likely to share similarities in their spelling, even when the pronunciation is different, and we want all students to understand this. And I think that really that's the basis of the morphological word families. There's so much more that you could learn. Please read the teaching guides and the information in teacher knowledge. Once you start exploring morphological word families, you'll want to know more about words, explore more about words. Look in Etym Online is a really useful resource as well for your research. So I encourage you to dip your toe in the water and see the connection between the big ideas, and not just see them in isolation, and see the connection across the year levels. So I think that's probably enough for you to think about this before you head off to plan your evening. So thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Christine. That was amazing and so interesting. As someone who doesn't have a teaching background, obviously has a marketing background, I did find that just fascinating. We've had a lot of people come through the chat now that are just thanking you. So everyone really enjoyed it. Everyone that's still online, thank you so much for spending your afternoon with Nelson Primary and Christine. We really appreciate you logging on, and we hope you took a lot from this. We will be sending out the recording of this session next week, so please keep an eye out in your inboxes for that. And we'll also have some details of who you can follow up with if you have any specific questions, or if you would like to see these resources that Christine's gone through. We'll be able to get someone to come and bring you samples, or get them to you in some way so that you can see exactly what they are and how they might work in your classroom. So thank you everyone for your time. Have a lovely evening and keep safe in these uncertain times, and we hope to see you soon. We will be looking to run a couple more of these sessions in term 4. So do keep an eye out for announcements from Nelson, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.